Hello, welcome to day 18 of this book, Frameworks Vol.2 God by Paul Blackham. Day 18 says, from everlasting to everlasting. From everlasting to everlasting. We've already thought a little bit about how God has always existed and always will go on to exist. He has always been. He is the first and the last. We thought about that when we started this Volume 2 book, when we thought about the tabernacle. The tabernacle, this tent, this place of worship, as a model of creation, the model of the things that God has made. But before Moses was instructed to make before he was to follow the instructions to make the tabernacle, he had to first make 3 pieces of furniture: the Ark of the Covenant, the table of bread, the table of presence, and the lampstand. And these 3 pieces of furniture representing the 3 persons of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and how they existed. They were alive and enjoyed eternal communion with each other before creation came into being. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit has always existed and will go on to exist forever, for all eternity. So you've already thought a little bit about that eternal, everlasting nature of God. Now, one of the things that people often think about when they think about God's eternal nature is they think about his relationship with time. And you may have heard people speak about it this way. Maybe you would articulate it this way, that somehow God is outside of time. He is outside of time, so that he's not really in our same kind of moment-to-moment existence, our experience of kind of a succession of events. One thing happens, and that's over, and then the next thing happens. And we somehow... philosophical thinking has kind of led to this idea that God, the divine being, must be outside of and untouched by time. It's as if, history of this whole line running across, and we live in each successive moment in history, but God is on top of it all, and he sits, and they're not kind of moving from one moment to the next, but he sits there and he's looking at and engaging with, kind of popping into and out of, I guess, different moments, but it's all there from laid out like a scroll. It sits above and outside of time. But is that really the sort of God that we find and that we meet in the scriptures? We find a God who is intimately engaged with the events of and all the happenings of creation. It speaks of a God, doesn't it, the Bible, of God who responds to the things that happen moment from one to the next. Not in terms of being reactive and getting caught out. No, he is, of course, still sovereign. He is still the one who rules and overrules over all things. He's never caught off guard. He knows the end from the beginning. And yet he is, in the Bible, presented as one who is involved from moment to moment, that he walks through the history of the world with us. Whether it's the conversations that happen within the Trinity, whether it's the Psalms or, say, in Hebrews 1, we get little glimpses into the conversations between the Father and the Son and the Spirit. And whether it's those conversations happening and, one speaks and the other responds, or whether it's just God doing things, and there is a before, a during, and an after to the actions and to the words of God. And so it is after God is incarnate, Jesus is incarnate, when he takes on flesh at that first Christmas. That is when something happens. Before that moment, he wasn't man and human in the way that we are. But after that moment, he is. And so it's really important for us to hold, actually, that God is not outside of time, but that he is sovereignly ruling in time with us. There's a couple of potential troubles that we run into if we think of God as outside of time. One, I've already hinted at, things like the incarnation. What is going on if God is outside of time? When would we say that he ever kind of took on flesh? When and kind of how did Jesus die if he's kind of sat outside of that? Has he eternally been somehow on the cross? Has he eternally been resurrected? What's happening in the Gospels? When Jesus steps out of heaven into our creation, does he go from some sort of timelessness to timefulness? It just doesn't seem to quite work. And then the second potential trouble is that actually if we think of God outside of time, it removes God from us. It sets him apart as this distant, kind of out there God who isn't really involved in our lives and our experience. That he's not really intimately involved and engaged with the history of and the day-to-day experience of his creation. Again, we're not taken away from the sovereignty of God. Of course, he's not caught off guard. He's not surprised by things. It's not like the future hope in heaven for us is in any way in question. No, of course these things have been fixed, have been determined by God the Father. He is the one who does whatever he pleases, if you remember that from a few days ago. And so, yes, this is the everlasting to everlasting God who is with us in the succession of moments, walking with us intimately through history. When he steps out of heaven, he really does step out and into our experience of earth and the experience of human flesh. When Jesus dies, he really does die in himself. He takes on death and the curse of sin. And when he rises and when he ascends to heaven and receives a new name, the name which is above every name, he really does take that on at that moment. And things change because of that. God is deeply, intimately involved, even as he is the one who rules from everlasting to everlasting.